All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. Today we're going to be doing an in-depth review of the Transformers 1 Sourcebook for the Transformers to the TTRPG. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. So, let's talk about this. For anyone that doesn't know, earlier in the year, a movie came out called Transformers 1. And it was an absolutely wonderful example of how you can screw up marketing so well that you tank your own good movie. The movie itself, recently watched it. It's good. It's fun. The voice cast is pretty good. Though I will say, Chris Hemsworth is no Peter Cullen. He does fine as the role, but you know, you're always going to be comparing him to Peter Cullen. But everything else, it's a great movie. And it did remarkably poorly in the box office because it was kind of advertised as this little kiddie movie, and it's really not. It's not that it's super adult or anything like that, but it's a perfectly fine movie for, you know, adults to watch, and kids can watch it too. And there's nothing in it that's particularly geared towards children, but there's also nothing in it that would be inappropriate for them as well. They used to call it family friendly, but now family friendly means we designed it for 4-year-olds. So yeah, to go along with it, and by go along with it, I mean come out like 4 to 6 months after the movie actually premiered, they created the Transformers 1 Sourcebook. And it's kind of an interesting book. Now, this is an in-depth review. And when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they did well, the things I think they need to do better. However, that takes a long time, and not a whole lot of people want to sit through an entire, like, 2-hour-long video just to figure out if they want to pick up something. So, I always start off these videos with a section I call, Should You Buy This? And I separate potential buyers into 3 different groups. The first group is players. Players are going to be people that are going to sit down at a table and primarily, not exclusively, but primarily play a single player character. They obviously have different wants and needs than other groups. The second group is going to be the GMs. GMs are people that are primarily, not exclusively, but primarily going to be sitting at a table and running the game. They're going to be creating the NPCs, voicing them, creating the encounters, creating the world to live in, all that fun stuff. And obviously they have different wants and needs than the players do. The third group is an often overlooked group that I call the Lorehounds. Lorehounds may never sit down at a table, but they really enjoy the lore, the world that the RPG is set in, and so obviously they have different wants and needs than the other 2 groups. So, should you buy this? Well, let's figure that out. The first group. Should players buy this book? So, the Transformers 1 Sourcebook is interesting, to say the least. I mention this all the time when I'm doing these in-depth reviews. TTRPG books can be separated into a number of different categories. You have your core books, which are the books that you absolutely 100% need to play the game. Then you have your additional books that are separated into adventures, just things that give you something to play, an adventure to run. You have rules expansions, which are exactly that. They just add additional rules to the game that let you do more things. And then you have what are called campaign settings. Campaign settings generally will have some new rules and some new things, but their primary focus is to create a setting, create a specific area, time period, something like that, that you can set your own adventures in. It's not a pre-written adventure, but it is designed to help you run adventures. Rules expansions generally tend to be geared more towards players, whereas campaign settings tend to be geared more towards GMs. The Transformers 1 sourcebook is a campaign setting. Um, and because of that, there's a lot of stuff here that is really, really useful to GMs. But there are some rather interesting things in here specifically for players. They have kind of the normal thing you're going to expect from any Essence 20 books. There's some new origins. There's some new influences. There are no new roles or foci. So as far as that aspect of your character, that's not going to change. But they do have not just a couple new factions, but these factions are specifically designed around bot characters. And that's a new thing that is introduced specifically in Transformers 1, is the idea of a bot character. A bot character doesn't have a transformation cog. They don't have an alternate mode. If you watch the movie, it actually explains why that is. I'm not going to spoil that for you, but it is a plot point in the movie. So the thing with other Transformers factions, like the Autobots and the Decepticons, the Autobots have a faction perk called For the Allspark. And part of that faction perk is the Roll Out aspect, which allows you basically to turn into your alt form when you roll initiative. The Decepticons have their own variation on that, which I believe is called For Megatron! But I can't 100% remember off the top of my head. However, since the Transformers TTRPG is really built around the idea of transformation, I know, crazy idea. I totally just spilled water on my glasses. It's like the greatest thing ever, and by the greatest thing ever, I mean it sucks. Let's see if we can get through this without my glasses becoming a problem. All right. It'll be good enough. All right. So the Transformer TTRPG, like the big thing about Transformers is their ability to transform. And so the idea of playing a non-transforming Transformer sounds like it's missing the point of the game. But that's one of the things that makes this so interesting. With the new bot origin, it allows you to play a bot character, and they have a new general perk that allows you to eventually get a TCOG or to change your TCOG, which is the thing that allows you to transform. And it really makes for a very different type of story. This book is designed to tell kind of the origin story of the Cybertronian Civil War, and kind of the origin story of Transformers in general when we start getting into Chapter 5 and the variations that are kind of contained within. So because of that, the stories that you can tell with Transformers 1 are very, very different, very, very unique. And because of the specific mechanics of the bot origin and the TCOG general perk, it actually allows you to customize your character even more so. I kind of consider the bot origin as very similar to like the variant human race in D&D 5th edition, where you get a free feat. At least that's how it was in 2014. The bot gets a free general perk. And so, again, for players that want to do something kind of interesting and unique with their character, it gives you a lot of ability to create a very customized character right from level 1. The downside to that is you don't get an alternate form unless and until you take the TCOG general perk, or somehow get that general perk given to you, because GMs can give out general perks as like rewards for things as like that as well. So the other thing is kind of unique about this is they do introduce a new weapon type called tools, which in addition to being weapons also act as effectively a kit for a certain type of thing. Like a saw might give you the ability to cut things better, things like that. So that also turns into something rather interesting. So as far as should players buy this book, well, normally when I do these reviews, I do them right after the PDF comes out, and that normally means that you can buy the hardcover book and get the PDF for free. That period has long since passed. This is a very late, in-depth review. But the cost for the hardcover book itself is $45 plus shipping. For players, do I think there's enough here to justify $45? Maybe not. Unless, again, if you really do want to try out a character like this, because you could even have a bot character in a full Transformers campaign where everyone else has alt modes, and it makes for a very interesting story. Like, the character themselves can start to kind of resent their transforming allies, and that can become a character path for them. Or it could be the exact other way. The other Transformer characters kind of look down on them because it's like, oh, you don't have a transformation cog, you're kind of lesser. And they kind of prove that, no, I can do anything that you guys can do, I just don't have to turn into a card to do it. And so that can create some very interesting stories. So if those are the kind of stories that you want, I would probably say $45 for the hardcover is a little bit much for the amount of content that is geared specifically towards players. However, the PDF is normally $30. As of me recording this, which is happening on December 2nd, it is currently on sale for $15. $15 is a steal for this book, even for players where there's really only one chapter that's going to give you like specific mechanical stuff and then some lore stuff that will be useful for your backstory. But not much else for player characters in here. But yeah, $15 is a steal. $30, again, if this is the kind of story that you want to tell and this is the kind of character you want to build, then I can see justifying $30. But if it's just one of those things of, I don't know if I'm ever going to play this, but I enjoy, having as many Transformers rules, $30 might be a little bit much. Maybe wait until a sale or something, like I said, like it is right now, for $15. So, yeah. Moving on. The second group. Should GMs buy this book? I gotta say, I have, because I've been trying to do this review for so long, I've read through this book like 4 or 5 times cover to cover. And each time I discover something new and interesting. Obviously goes without saying, if your players want to use these new options, you probably need a copy of this book just so you can adjudicate on them. However, there is so much more in here that I find really fascinating. And probably the chapter that surprised me the most is Chapter 2, Your Characters, Your Group. Chapter 2 is something that I'm surprised we haven't seen in other Essence 20 books, but it's effectively... like one of the subchapters is called Teaching the Rules, and it gives you a few tips and tricks on how to get new people into the game. I would assume the reason why this book kind of has this introduction to how to get people to play the Transformers RPG, I would assume it has it in here because due to the fact that it's a tie-in to a movie, they think that you can use this to get fans of the movie to become fans of the game, and that's why they included it in here. Is it the most robust teaching and training rules that I've ever seen? No. But nothing in there is egregiously wrong or anything like that. It's just not quite as detailed as someone like me, who has trainer in their name, would have gone into for how to teach new people how to play the game, and other aspects that might... come up with a group of new players. Things like splitting the party, character development, family play is another thing they talk about, is how to play a game like this with your family, which for anyone that has never actually played a TTRPG with your family, it doesn't work the same way as getting down with a bunch of friends or a group of total strangers like a convention or a friendly local game store or something. Because not only do you already have relationships with these other people at the table, but more likely than not, you have very complicated relationships with them, and you live together with them. Running a game with your family or for your family is very, very interesting. And they do give a few tips on how to make that as smooth as possible. Again, none of it is massively in depth, but it is fairly good stuff. And then you have kind of the regular stuff you would expect to see in a campaign setting. You have a bunch of new threats and allies. You have a bunch of new contacts, which again, the contact system in Essence 20 is by far the greatest NPC aid system I've seen in a TTRPG. It's very, very simple to understand. It's very, very simple to use, but it's very, very robust. It allows you to do a lot of different things. And because of its simplicity, it's very, very easy to create your own contacts based on that stupid throwaway character that your players seem to hyperfixate on, and now you can't get rid of it because now he's their favorite person ever, and he's now the cook on their ship. And I'm looking at you, Chax. Yeah, like that stuff is in there and it's fine. And then they also have, you know, the location things where it talks about a new location. It gives you a description of it, gives you some story hooks and other stuff that can happen there. All that stuff is very, very useful for GMs in general. But the thing that kind of blew my mind, Chapter 5 is called Campaigns and Variations. And what it is it's basically alternative ways that the world can work. Basically, it shows like the 13 primes and it gives little blurbs about them so that you can use the 13 primes to run a campaign around one of them or all of them. It has alternate origins to Cybertron, as far as like what happened, who was Primus, where did it come from. And so Chapter 5 effectively is all of these little guides and stories that you can use to create your own version of the Transformers universe instead of playing in a pre-established one. And I find that really, really fascinating because it's not something that we've really seen in any of the other Essence 20 books. The Essence 20 books are built around these very established licenses. And they do mention in there, hey, by the way, you don't have to stick with the lore and everything like that. It's your game. Feel free to change anything that you want. But this is the first time where they've actually gone, by the way, here's an alternate reality that you could use to build your campaign around where things work differently. And for GMs in general, especially if you have been running Transformers for a little while, or if you have players that are just very, very familiar with Transformers, and either you're worried you're not going to be able to kind of challenge them or surprise them, or they're just like, you know what, I've watched Transformers so many times, I don't want to deal with that. It's like, well, what if it was different? What if we made our own version of the Transformers? That can be something that can motivate players to play. So again, going like price point wise, $45 plus shipping. Again, for the amount of stuff, the book itself is a little over 110 pages. Let me see. Yeah, it's 112 pages. So it is not an exorbitantly long book. And $45, in my humble opinion, $45 is pushing it just a little bit as far as me being able to justify the amount of content that you get in here for the price. However, that Chapter 5 section is what pushes it over the top for me, because all of these different like alternate origins and alternate allegiances and things like that, all of those things can create a significant amount of effectively replay value, because once you're done with your one-shot or your campaign or whatever you're doing with Transformers, you can immediately go play it again, but use a different origin or a different prime or something like that and have a completely different experience from beginning to end. And so for me, that tops it over to, I can see $45 plus shipping. I can 100% see that being something that I would spend on. However, if you don't mind not having a physical book, $30 definitely justified. And again, right now, as I'm recording this, the PDF is on sale for $15. So $15 again. This is an absolute steal, especially for the amount of good content in there for GMs in general. Definitely pick it up. So, moving on. The third group. Should Lorehounds buy this book? Campaign settings generally tend to be really friendly to Lorehounds because, again, they have to establish a campaign. And I've said that if I've said this once, I've said it 100 times. Essence 20 by far is the best, and the Essence 20 Renegade team specifically are the best people I have seen in mixing lore and mechanics in all of their books. I've never read an Essence 20 book where they don't have a lore justification for any mechanics that they put into the game. And I really, really love that. And for Lorehounds, that's really, really useful. However, this book goes a little bit further with, again, that Chapter 5, Campaigns and Variations. That entire chapter, which isn't exorbitantly long, it's 104 to 112. So that's what? It's only 8 pages. That 8 pages has so much kind of interesting what-if scenarios that in and of itself might be worth the purchase price, depending on what we're talking about here, specifically for Lorehounds, because there's some really cool stuff. And then, obviously, lots of artwork. I believe almost all, if not all, the artwork is effectively screenshots and grabs from the movie itself. I don't believe there's any original artwork in this entire book that is not from the movie. But again, it's a tie-in to the movie, so that makes perfect sense. And the movie itself looks pretty good. It is a different animation style than most people are used to seeing for the Transformers. So some people were turned off by that by a little bit. I wasn't. I think it still looks very Transformers-y. It's just kind of a more cartoony-ish Transformers, which I'm perfectly fine with. So yeah, the campaigns and variations, the locations chapter has lots of really, really good stuff. And then literally everything else has a little bit of lore in it. So again, going back to price points, is this worth $45 for a Lorehound? Again, depending on how you want to read it, having a physical copy of the book can be very, very useful because you can take it with you everywhere. Whereas a PDF, if you don't have a tablet or don't like reading it on a phone or something like that, taking the PDF around with you might be a little bit more difficult, whereas the physical book isn't. So if you're a big stickler for physical, I could see you justifying $45 for the lore in here. It would be a hard sell, but I think it's possible. However, if you don't mind not having a physical copy, again, the amount of stuff for Lorehounds in here is fantastic for $30, and the sale price that it is right now for $15 is even more of a steal. So definitely go ahead and feel comfortable picking this up, especially if you are interested in the Transformers 1 kind of movie and the lore that's created around it. This gives a lot more context to that. So, moving on. So, quick recommendation recap. For players, the physical copy might be a bit of a hard sell at $45, but the PDF at $30 is pretty good for the amount of content that you get. And right now it's on sale for $15. It's definitely a good idea. For GMs, I can definitely go all the way and say $45 is still worth it for the physical. And then the PDF at $30. Definitely worth it. The sale price right now, $15, is an absolute steal. And then finally, for Lorehounds, if you are a physical person, you like your physical books, I can see you justifying $45 for the amount of lore that's in here. However, $30 for the PDF is definitely worth it. And the sale price right now of just $15 is exceptionally worth it. Go ahead and pick it up and feel very happy with your purchase. So, if you were just here for the recommendation, thank you very much for tuning in. In the comments down below, let me know, do you have a favorite bot from the movie? just put that in the comments down below and enjoy your book. However, for the rest of us, I believe it is time for us to get into this in-depth review. So, as a reminder, this is going to be an in-depth review. And when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I'm going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think I did well, the things I think they need to do better. And that takes a long time. Most of these videos are anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours. And sitting here listening to my annoying, stuttering voice for 3 hours is not fun. This one won't be 3 hours. It's not a long enough book. So I do put in timestamps. I timestamp every single chapter. So go to the ones that look the most interesting to you. Feel free to watch this in sections. I know YouTube would rather me say, no, watch it 700 times all in a row. But I understand people have lives and things like that. So watch it in sections, come back to it later, use the timestamps. That is what they are there for. So with that being said, let's get into this in-depth review. The first section, the introduction. Let's try this again. Every single Essence 20 book has an introduction. One of the things that I genuinely enjoy about them is most of the introductions start with kind of an in-universe explanation of what's going to go on here. And then they go into the stuff that you're expecting. Using this book, one of the specific sections that they mention in here is a section called Deviations and What Ifs. And I'll just read it directly from them because it's very short. In addition to presenting material directly from the film, this sourcebook seeks to provide additional options that can enhance your Transformers 1 campaign. Items that aren't canonical are referenced with an asterisk in their headers. So there's quite a few things in here that are intentionally not part of the canon. They are alternative versions. They are what-if scenarios, things like that. And it does make for a very interesting, unique read. One of the interesting things about Transformers 1, the movie, is it is in and of itself a what-if scenario. Because the origins of the Cybertronian Civil War have been told quite a few different times. So this is probably like the 4th or 5th revision to what might have caused the Cybertronian Civil War. So the movie itself is a what if, and they decided to kind of lean into that and go, well, what if the movie wasn't true too? So I really, really enjoy that. They give you a refresher on contacts. One of the other things that happens in this that I don't think I've seen in other books, but it might be that I'm just forgetting, is there are a decent number of references to other books. Specifically the Decepticon Directive and the Enigma of Combinations source books. So anytime they reference those things, they will put DD next to the thing to indicate that this is in the Decepticon Directive book, or EOC, which doesn't stand for Equal Opportunity Committee, or Compliance, which is what it means in the business world. But no, that stands for the Enigma of Combination. So this is one of the first books that kind of implies that if you want to get the full use out of it, you do need to own both of those books. But there's plenty of stuff in here that even if you don't own either of them, you can still get a lot of use out of it. So I found that interesting. And yeah, the introduction is 2 pages. Super short, super simple. Moving on. Chapter 1. Character options. So, character options, exactly that. But as I mentioned in my Should You Buy It section, this book revolves around the idea of playing as bots. As I mentioned before, bots are Transformers that don't have a transformation cog. They don't have the ability to transform into any thing. It is a plot point in the movie. I'm not going to get into specifics about it, but if you want to know why go ahead and watch the movie, or you can just the book itself does spoil the movie 100%. It will spoil the movie for you. So if you pick up the book and you go, oh, I'll watch the movie later, understand major plot points are going to be revealed in the book because you need to know them to be able to play these characters. Yeah, so the first thing that they have in this character options is the new bot origin. And like I said before, one of the kind of unique things about the bot origin is, while yes, you do not have an alt mode, you do get their origin perk is called Learned to Adapt. You gain a general perk. You may choose any general perk provided you meet its prerequisites. So very similar to how in D&D 5.0, if you chose the human variant race, you got a free feat at level 1. And it meant that anyone that wanted to make really interesting kind of customized characters would generally choose a human variant because feats are a major deal and they majorly change how you play your character. The same is true about perks in the Essence 20 system. So this is a really simple way to create a very unique character that effectively gets an additional perk, and that additional perk comes right at level 1. Now, later on, you can get a TCOG by taking the new TCOG perk that shows up a little later in this chapter. And so effectively what that means is you're kind of just shifting when you would get a perk. So let's say you get your first general perk at 4th level. So let's say for this character, you start off as a bot, but by the time you get to 4th level, it's like, I really want to be a transformer. You've effectively just shifted because you have to use your 4th level perk to get your transformation. You've effectively just kind of shifted that perk that you would get to 4 levels earlier. However, there's also a chance that you could just get that perk as kind of a reward for doing something from your GM and still have access to that original perk. It's entirely up to your GM, but it does mean that the bot's origin is not inherently unbalanced, quote unquote, because it gets a free perk when other origins don't. Yeah. So after kind of dealing with that, they introduced a bunch of new influences, which most of them, again, are interesting, are unique. The Essence 20 system in general, the influence system is so cool and so unique because it is built around the idea of you mix and match multiple influences to create your character. And I just love that. I think it's really, really fun. So just adding a bunch of new influences creates interesting things, not only because the influence itself is going to be useful, but how it interacts with other influences. Also, there's a specific influence called Minor, where later on there's a perk that if you have the Minor origin, it increases what you can do with tool type weapons, which becomes really, really interesting. Yeah, one specific influence can massively affect how your character plays, which I think is pretty cool. And then they have 2 new factions, and this is something that I find really interesting. So factions are just a thing in Essence 20. However, for the most part, Power Rangers and especially Transformers generally don't tend to interact with it anywhere near as much as like G.I. Joe, where you can change your faction more times than you change your underwear. G.I. Joe is built around just all these different factions. Transformers, there's just not quite as many factions. And Power Rangers, again, you have the Power Rangers faction, and then you have a few non-Power Rangers factions. So the 2 new factions in here are specifically built around non-transforming characters. So if you are playing a bot, being a part of the autonomous bots instead of the Autobots or the High Guard instead of the Decepticons, can be more beneficial for you because the faction perks don't have anything to do with your alternate mode. The other thing that they mention in here is both of these factions are meant to be guides, so that if you wanted to create your own bot-focused faction, you can. Using a process, they don't call it this, but I refer to it as templating, which is basically you look at options and figure out kind of the core pieces of them, and then use that to make your own versions of them. So they specifically mention, yeah, these are meant to be examples. You can use them right as they are. They work perfectly. But it also gives you all the tools that you need to be able to make your own non-transformation based Transformers factions. And that in and of itself I find really, really cool. And very, very useful for GMs that want to tell more kind of unique, interesting stories that the book hasn't specifically told you how to tell. So very much a big fan of that. Then we get into a few general perks. The general perks here are really, really cool. One of the big ones, they have retrofit TCOG. So basically what that does, if you don't have a TCOG, that is the perk that allows you to take a TCOG, and they have rules for how all that works. But if you have a Transformer, if they want to change their TCOG for whatever reason, they would also be able to take the retrofit to TCOG. And there are benefits to that. One of the big things being when you gain a TCOG, you still so here, a Transformer gaining a new TCOG loses the alt mode but not origin perk of their previous origin and gains a new alt mode. So it allows you to change your alt mode, but you get to keep the original origin perk of your origin, which again can just be used to create really interesting new customized versions of origins by basically kind of mixing and matching alt modes with different origin perks. So that in and of itself is kind of really interesting. Then they have other things like Handybot requires you to have the minor influence, but it lets you treat close combat blades and bludgeons as though they had the tool trait, and you get an upshift on attacks with weapons with the tool trait. So that in and of itself can be something that's really interesting. I believe that's the only perk that actually references an influence, but it is a rather useful influence. The faction perk for the autonomous bots, just to also talk about miners' influence. One of the perks is, in addition to your roles, equipment, training, and qualifications, you are qualified with all standard equipment and trained with weapons with the tool trait. Autonomous bots with the minor influence are instead qualified with weapons with the tool trait. So, what that means, the way that weapons and equipment works in Essence 20 in general, is at the start of a mission, you get to requisition new equipment. And the way that works is all characters will get the standard equipment, which depending on the game you're playing is generally going to be like a blaster and a melee weapon, and then, a grenade. That's generally what you have. Anything you are trained in, you can attempt to requisition. However, and that requires you making a roll. And if you fail the roll, you don't get it. You only have a limited number of rolls you can make for your different equipment things. However, anything you are qualified with does not require a requisition roll. You just get it. So any item that has the tool trait on it, you automatically get without a requisition roll. And then you can use that requisition roll to customize it in some way to get something else that'll be useful for you. So that in and of itself is very, very useful. And when we get to the equipment section, we'll talk about a few of the new tool items and how useful they can be. So yeah, again, that minor influence is really pulling some weight in there. So the next section is equipment. Again, there's a new weapon trait. It is tool. And when you requisition a weapon with a tool trait, designate a skill specialization tied to its intended use. You treat the weapon as a kit of the designated specialization with availability equal to the weapon's availability. For example, a cyber saw is a restricted weapon, so you could choose to treat it as a restricted brawn digging kit. And again, kits basically just make it easier or possible for you to do certain things. So, again, there's a decent number of these new weapons. I believe the lowest availability of them is going to be limited. So you have limited and restricted ones. I don't see any experimental stuff in here. But yeah, and there are things like the Ultra Drill, Heavy Auger, a Sonic Probe, all useful, interesting things, and all things that, again, will help your character play very, very differently. Because now, in addition to having a weapon, you also have a kit that allows you to do different things and interact with the environment differently, which both in and outside of combat is going to make things more interesting and more fun. In addition to that, they introduced the mining jetpack vehicle, just the little jetpack that you have. It's not too crazy. And that's it. So, moving on. Chapter 2. Your characters, your group. This entire chapter, again, is kind of my how do I get people into my game chapter. And so it starts off as kind of explaining, hey, this is kind of the idea behind role-playing games and how you can get people interested in it. Then it goes through the family play section. They specifically have a section called Teaching the Rules, which, again, is very short. It's basically like half a page, maybe 3/4 of a page worth of text. But it does have some pretty good tips on how to teach new players a new TTRPG system. I would never say that Essence 20 is an incredibly complex system, but it did start out as a D&D 5th edition hack. So it is more complicated than something like, say, Daggerheart, which is a little bit more kind of freeform and fiction focused. So it can be a little bit complex, especially if you're dealing with Transformer characters. It can be a little bit complex for some people, so the tips there are relatively useful. They also introduce these two types of play called playing to lift and playing to lose. Playing to lift is basically the idea of you are actively going to be looking for ways to lift up your fellow player characters. So you're going to be looking for things that they do well and find ways to incorporate it. To give you an example, if someone always seems so innocent that no one could suspect of anything, others can make a point of saying something like, "You're all suspects in this case." Well, not you, obviously. I know you could never do something like this, but all the rest of you. That's a really simple method of, this is a part of their character that they have chosen to emphasize, and you're kind of going with that idea. It's kind of the improvisational aspect of, like, always say yes. They've declared something about their character, and you're going to kind of feed into that declaration by specifically lifting up that aspect of their character and kind of showing it off to everyone. Playing to lose is effectively leaning into the fact that failure isn't a bad thing. Failure tells more interesting stories. So example here from the text. In many movies, the midpoint is a place where the protagonist has the chance at an early victory, but they fail to grasp it because of some unresolved personal issue. Such a moment in a role playing game feels awful for the character, but it can be exhilarating drama for the player and the whole group. Embracing these fragile moments of failure is called playing to lose. And I've never seen it kind of spelled out so explicitly in a TTRPG book. I used to belong, I technically still do, but the channel's effectively dead, to a group that we called the All for Geek Alliance. And our motto was go forth and screw up. I've said this many, many times before. Success is a horrible teacher. Failure is a fantastic teacher. Embrace failure. Failure is good for you. It is the best, easiest way to learn a lot of different things, as long as the failure condition is not something life-changing. And so I really like the idea that they actually kind of bring up that idea of, yeah, failure isn't a bad thing. It creates tension, it creates drama, it creates more interesting stories. Stories that the hero never fails at are boring, and no one wants to watch them. They want to see them struggle. They want to see them overcome that struggle. But in order for them to overcome something, they first have to experience it. So yeah. And then they talk about things like splitting the party, playing together, conflict, secrets and traitors and stuff like that. Again, really useful advice, especially for either newer groups or groups that have never played with these kind of aspects. It's all useful stuff. And again, even if you don't plan on playing this particular source book material, Chapter 2 is a remarkably useful tool just for GMing in general. So, moving on. Chapter 3. Threats and Allies. It's your standard monster manual chapter. One of the things that's really interesting about this, though, so one of the characters in the game is a character named B127. When you watch the movie, you'll know exactly who that is, and who they eventually become. But the threat stat blocks for B27, they have a stat block for B27 bot, then they have a stat block for B127 with a TCOG. And then they also have a stat block for B127 Loudmouth Helper. So there are 3 different versions of B127, and they also have a contact version of B127. And they do that for basically, I think, all of the main characters in Transformers 1. So B127, D16, Alita 1, and then Orion Pax. They have effectively 4 different versions of them that you can use in your game, which I absolutely adore. I think that's amazing. And again, it really shows the different ways that you can portray the exact same character depending on where they are. Like this one, like the Alita 1 version, the bot version is threat level 2. Alita 1 with TCOG is threat level 4, and then Alita 1 Commander is threat level 7. So you kind of see, as the character grows in power, how its stat block changes. Do they do that with every single character? No, I think it is exclusively just those 4 characters. But they do have a lot of other stat blocks, like they have a stat block for Sentinel Prime, and their various things. One of my favorite characters, just because I wasn't expecting them, and I don't know if this is a character that was specifically created for Transformers 1, or I just wasn't aware this was a character. There is a character called Arachnid. And what they are is they are effectively kind of like a hovercopter that when it transforms, the kind of circles that go around the hover blade turn into kind of Doc Ock spider legs. And I find that really, really cool because they're not a beast-based robot. Like they're not meant to be a mechanical spider or something like that, but they do have beast-like appendages that make them a very cool bot. I gotta say, a lot of the bots in here are very, very cool looking. Things like I really enjoy the design of Darkwing. I think he's cool. I think Sentinel Prime also is massively cool looking. And then again, you have more familiar things: Shockwave, Skywarp, Soundwave, Slipstream, Starscream, Thundercracker. They do have a stat and contact list for Alpha Trion, who's another character that's important to the plot. Fun fact, voiced by Lawrence Fishburne, and he does a very, very good job. And then some other just kind of regular bots, RC and Firestar. You know, the list goes on. Again, I've mentioned this many, many times in other Essence 20 reviews. Unlike most TTRPGs, it is nearly impossible to make a boring Essence 20 threat stat block effectively. Like, to give you an example, they do have generic units in here. Let me pick one up real quick. So, here's one. It's called a Tracker Elite. It's threat level 7. It's got 3 different perks that make it interesting. It's got a bunch of different attacks, and then a few different powers and gears, and even a hang-up to make it more than just, oh, here's a stat block that you can throw at your enemy, or throw at your players. You really can't. I mean, you theoretically can, but it's kind of missing the point of the game. Essence 20 almost forces you to create interesting, unique characters, even if they're just throwaway combats, and I really, really love that. I think it's really great that they do that. So yeah, I mean, again, the entire chapter is just threats and allies. It does what it says on the tin, but it's good stuff, and there's lots of interesting characters that you can get that you can use. Or again, you can template them and turn them into whatever you want. Moving on. Chapter 4. Locations. This is another thing that I really, really love about Essence 20 books in general. Is a lot of them will have a location section. And instead of just going, here's a map, and here's where everything is on the map, they would do, like, to give you an example, the first section, the first location they talk about here is called the Archives. And so they have a section called What It's Like, where it just kind of describes what's there. Then they specifically have a section called Evoking the Archives. And I'll just read what they have here. The following quick descriptions can help capture the feel and tone of the archives. First one. A faint blue glow from the ceiling creates as much shadow as light, making it nearly impossible to tell how quickly time is passing or distinguish one corridor from the next. Second one. The clanging metal sound of heavy footsteps echoes through the corridors as one set of guards replaces another. Third one. A toppled storage bin has come open, spilling red and yellow data disks in a heap across the center of an archives corridor. So this, in addition to just going, hey, this is the description of it, it specifically gives you, hey, this is the feeling you should feel in here, and here's some things that can make it feel like the right place. Then they have a section called Scenes, where it talks about the different kinds of scenes. Like they have combat scenes. These are maybe combats that might happen here. Exploration scenes that might happen here. Social scenes that might happen here. Then they have a story hook section, where if you want to have an adventure that's specifically centered in the archives, these are some story hooks that would require your players to interact with this location. And then they have a character section for characters you might find in there, and then terrain features. And they do that for every single one of these locations. And I just love that. One of the most difficult things to learn as a game master is how to set the tone effectively. And the absolute really best and almost only way you can do that is by to be blunt, reading a lot, and developing your ability to describe things. As you do that more, you start to realize the things that tend to work well. For me, I like to use smell and taste in my descriptions. If the players go into like a cave, I will describe it as, as you start descending into the cave, you notice an increase of the humidity. You can feel this kind of tackiness, and the air itself develops this musty smell that almost makes you cough for a second. Those things are very, very sensual. They activate sense memories. Another one I like to use is when you go into an area with an unpleasant smell. I'll go, as you go in there, you smell this. You are instantly overwhelmed with this noxious scent. In the back of your throat, you can taste that kind of acidic taste when you smell something very strong and rank. Using those things evokes scent memories and can really immerse people in a location. And so by having these evoking the archives or evoking the Energon mines or whatever, it helps you to understand these are things that you can focus on to make people feel like they're there. And I think, it's just so good. Yeah. One of the things that's in there, it's a minor plot point in the movie. Well, minor to major, depending on how you want to deal with it. But there is a race called the Iacon 5000. Iacon is the city that they're in. And 5,000, I would assume, is how long the raceway is, or just a nifty number. So they do have an entire section on how to run the Iacon 5000. Basically, it's kind of a winners take all race, where there's obstacles and things can be destroyed and stuff like that. Like, it's really interesting and unique. And definitely feels like a very Transformers thing to deal with. So having a whole section going, by the way, if you want to run an Iacon 5000, do this. And again, just because you're not playing Transformers 1 doesn't mean that you can't add a race to your game. I remember back when the new D&D 5th edition adventure was based on the Tomb of Horrors. They had, because Faerun was the default setting at the time, they had placed this version of the Tomb of Horrors in Chult. And Chult is famous for having dinosaurs. And so in the Acquisitions Incorporated episode where they were dealing with that, they had a dinosaur race, which you could use these exact rules for any kind of race that you would want. And it could be very, very fun. So again, another thing that you don't actually have to run a Transformers 1 campaign to get something useful out of this. Yeah, some of the locations are a little bit spoilery, so I'm not going to go into them too much, but it is very interesting and very cool, to say the least. So, yeah. Moving on. Chapter 5. Campaigns and Variations. So, I mentioned this in a couple of my recommendations. This is probably the coolest chapter that they have for this book. Specifically because it creates what-ifs. The first section is called the 13 Primes, and it describes not only every single one of the 13 Primes, but how you could link that prime into a campaign so that they're kind of heavily involved and motivate the campaign. And they all are very, very interesting and cool. And then after that, you have the Origins section, which talks about various different ways that, like, Cybertron and the Transformers could have come about. There's the Primus origin. There's the quintessence origin, techno-organic evolution, which is basically they weren't always transformers. They started off as organics and eventually evolved themselves into these robots. The idea of the all-spark. Then they have an entire thing that says, "and stranger still," and just basically says, "or do your own thing." Then they have a bunch of different Transformers groups that could be a part of any of your campaigns. Things like the Monster Bots, or the Acolytes of Unicron, or the Bioformers. And then they have a little section called Example Wars, which basically takes these little factions and shows how they might interact with each other and force the players to effectively choose a side. Like the first Example War is they have the Micromasters versus the Functionist versus the Renegades. And so this is kind of a three-way, like, StarCraft level war, and eventually you will be forced to choose between one of these three factions, which I really, really enjoy that. And then they have an entire section called Alternative Origin Stories, where they talk about the different versions of origin stories that have come about. So Transformers: The War Within has its own origin for the start of the Cybertronian Civil War. Transformers Megatron has its own thing. Shattered Glass, I just like to read this one because it's really interesting. Shattered Glass is a twisted mirror universe of the standard narrative. Here, the Autobots are the ruthless villains and freedom-hating autocrats. Meanwhile, the let's try this again, not the Democrats. The Decepticons are the heroic freedom fighters working against the reign of the tyrant Optimus Prime. So that's a really interesting idea. Then they also have Transformers Unicron. And then the final section is called Side Stories and Unanswered Questions, where they talk about things from the movie that were never fully finished. So things like what happens with the High Guard. Again, I won't go into details because it does reveal a little bit of the story. Or the original Beasts. Because Alpha Trion, his alternate mode is bestial. It's like a panther-looking thing. So that might be Alpha Trion might be the progenitor of the Maximal style things in your campaign. So yeah, lots of cool stuff in there. Moving on. Two final thoughts. Like I said before, this is such an interesting book. I came into it thinking it's like, oh, this is just going to be a tie-in book for Transformers 1. I'm not going to be too thrilled with it, but there is a lot of really good stuff in here. That being said, it still does feel a little bit content light, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that a decent amount of the book, both Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, are built around the idea of we're going to give you ideas to create your own things as opposed to just laying out, okay, this is how this works, this is how this works, this is how this works. So there's a lot more creativity that is inspired by this book than quite a few other of the books that I've dealt with. And so overall, it's a very interesting, unique book. I'm not sure I personally would want to play as a bot when I could be a Transformer, but I could definitely see running a bot campaign, because that could be a very interesting game to run, or even using like the bot rules and stuff like that to have a situation where your characters technically started as Transformers but lost their T-Cogs for whatever reason. And using this as kind of a guide for them to kind of deal with that. That could be a very interesting story as well. So, yeah. Overall, I really like it. I think it's a cool book. But, that is going to be all for me today. As always, again, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. In the comments down below, what do you guys think specifically about all the kind of alternate realities and variations that they have in this. Do you guys think that's really cool? Or are you more interested in the idea of, no, I'm playing something from an established universe so I can play in that established universe? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's going to be all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.